Welcome to tonight's Facebook Live interview with Dr. Albert Mohler. This is a part of our series interviewing the nominees for President of the Southern Baptist Convention as a part of our SBC 21 Presidential Nominees Q&A group. Now, you have submitted over 60 questions already tonight, and we're going to be drawing from that as we interview Dr. Mohler. Now, in the way of introduction, Dr. Mohler has been president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary for over 27 years. He makes regular appearances on media outlets to discuss current events and hosts a regular podcast called The Briefing. We are so grateful for Dr. Mohler joining us tonight and being a part of this interaction and this interview. Also joining me tonight as my co-host is Joni Hannigan. Joni is a former member of Naval Intelligence. She's been a writer and editor for over 40 years and was the managing editor for the Florida Baptist Witness, which was the state convention's paper. She also served as the Baptist Student Union Director for Collegiate Ministry at Indiana University in Bloomington. It was there where she met Dr. Mohler when he came to be the president at Southern in 1993. Now, with that transition, I'm going to hand it off to Joni. Joni, why don't you take the first question for us tonight?
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Mohler, if you recall, you came and spoke to our BSU at Bloomington.
Yeah.
And Dean Richard McCaig was there and was really interested to hear your talk on postmodernism, and later commended us for having such a high-profile speaker, an important speaker. And we were, of course, so grateful to have you there. And it was just a great thought to remember that moment. And
Joni,
speaking about
it well. Thank you.
Great. And it's hard to believe now also that we're both grandparents. I think a little water's gone under the bridge.
No, but that's the sweetest thing to be said about either of us.
That is very true.
That's true.
Very true. And I was thinking back about that time, and it was such a good time with collegiate ministry, and we were definitely in a postmodern era. I think that's when it began, pretty much, even though it wasn't yet 2000. And it reminded me, last week I saw something interesting I read in Baptist Press, that the North American Mission Board has asked for a ministry reassignment. They've asked, they are seeking to take over the ministry assignment of collegiate ministry from Lifeway. And I wondered tonight, what would you think of that idea?
I want to see Southern Baptists have a very strong collegiate ministry. I don't think we have come close to doing what God would call us to do with college students and on college campuses. I don't know whether Lifeway or NAM is best equipped to do this, but evidently this was in conversation between the two. So it's not like a hostile takeover here. But I think the proof's going to be in the pudding as to whether Southern Baptists really care about reaching young people on college campuses, first of all in evangelism, but also in discipleship. So, Joni, I'm not sure how to answer your question other than to say I'd be hopeful, but it also comes down to the fact that on the ground, most of this work is done by state conventions, not by the SBC, at least historically. And I was just, by the way, at the University of Arkansas, and place by place, we're stronger, and other places weaker. We need to be strong everywhere and engaged in the battle for the mind.
I appreciate that. I guess the thought that occurred to me at that point was, we hear all the time about the number of church plants being down, the number of Southern Baptists being down, evangelism having to kind of redo some things. And I guess it was in that light that I thought, North American Mission Board, okay, I think they're dealing with some major issues right now. So is this the time for them to tackle yet another major ministry assignment?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that other than to say that clearly you're looking at some significant challenges Lifeway's been very upfront about those, and so I'm not saying anything that's not said publicly. Um, I think the state convention should have a lot to say about this, and if indeed NAM puts the muscle behind this and the right convictions, it will be a very good thing. But I don't know. This is up to Southern Baptists, by the way. Southern Baptists get to make these assignments, and I think this question's all tied together. By the way, when you just look at some of the very numbers you're talking about, the reality is ministry in a post-modern, or you might even say in a different sense, post-Christian age is very different. And Southern Baptists are going to figure out whether we can do this or not. I know Christ Faithful Church is up to this, but Southern Baptists in this generation are going to have to rise to the challenge.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Mohler, let me follow up with that and
Mm-hmm.
maybe even build on some of that. But we're looking at our annual meeting, only a couple of weeks away at this point,
Right.
and we've already had to have a venue change. We've had so many issues already. Last year, obviously, was canceled because of the pandemic. A lot of people still aren't comfortable yet being able to really travel and make their way. Do you think we've come to an era now because of the advances in technology and that kind of thing where maybe we should look at being able to do an in-person and an online participation where people can participate easily without huge cost, coming from Alaska or Hawaii or really a lot of other places, even in the continental United States, depending on where the convention's held?
Yeah, I would be very reluctant to think that that's a good option for the Southern Baptist Convention. The SBC is so unlike other denominations. We don't legislate. We don't have a House of Bishops. We have an annual meeting, and we were prevented from having that meeting last year. But the meeting is actually a dynamic of people in the room who are messengers elected by our churches. If we change that into an online character, I'm going to tell you, I think that's the biggest recipe for losing control of the SBC in terms of the people who are committed to it. And I honestly think it would give an opening for a move that eventually could well liberalize the SBC. I think there's something about messengers, first of all, that very word. We don't have delegates, we have messengers.
Right.
They're going to a meeting. And I think the dynamic of being in that meeting is a very important thing. And as you know, things happen in the SBC in a meeting that that can shift the entire perception of people who are there in the meeting. I don't know how that would work, but on an online format. But I'd sure rather be having the conversation with you folks tonight, here in my study, than doing it this way. This way,
Right.
I hope will honor the Lord and be useful, but it's no substitute for being in the room together.
Right. Well, and I don't think anybody would argue that it's always better to be able to be toe to toe and nose to nose, I guess you could say. It just, I guess, with technology. Now, you use an interesting word there that we have heard surface in the group a number of times as one of the reasons why individuals who are in leadership right now don't want to move to some type of an online venue where there could be remote voting and that kind of thing. That was the word control. Many of them, and we've seen it surface in several threads within our group, where they have asked, well, it looks like they're wanting to hold control, and that couldn't be done if it were in a more virtual setting. With technology, I know there could be some checks and balances and all this stuff with credentialing messengers and that kind of thing. But you obviously feel very opposed to that. Unpack that a little bit more for us.
Well, I want Southern Baptists who are deeply invested in this denomination to maintain control. And by that, the churches that care enough to send messengers. And this was key. I mean, I don't think there would have been a conservative resurgence had this technology existed. It takes messengers sent by churches to the Southern Baptist Convention, who, by the way, stay in the room and see the job done. And that's something that conservatives in the SBC had to learn It even required extraordinary measures in 1985 to get messengers back to the convention after many of them had left, thinking that the issues had been
Right.
decided. Um, I look. I think, and I think you look across the society. If you just say to people, "We're lowering the threshold of voting in a meeting," and you don't really have to do anything. You don't have to go to any particular effort to get to the meeting. I mean, I wonder how many of our churches could survive in a setting where they did business or congregational meetings that way.
Yeah. Let me just say this, especially to our viewers that are watching. We want to talk about some of those things that we know are probably going to surface at this coming annual meeting. And of course, it'll be all in person. We always stream it. It's always streamed on sbc.net or the annual meeting site that they set up. But one of the things that I've just been thinking about when you think of that is obviously the critical race theory, which you've been very outspoken about, Resolution 9, that kind of thing. And we're going to come back to that in a minute as we keep talking about some of the annual meeting things. Joni has another question, though, about unity, because we've been hearing that and that thread actually in our group quite a bit lately. So, Joni, why don't you take that?
Yeah, Dr. Mohler, in a 2019 statement, you were responding to Tom Askell's video that he was about to put out, an interview in that anyway, and you said that Southern Baptists had serious issues to discuss. And your quote is, "It is incumbent upon all SBC leaders that we be willing to talk about whatever issues Southern Baptists consider important." You said that Southern Baptists had never represented uniformity, but we cannot survive without unity. So, considering that, and considering the fact that 30% of our respondents on this in this Facebook group had mentioned transparency, and many related to finances, are you in favor of opening the books of our entities so that Southern Baptists may see how their tithes and offerings are used?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that. Again, I mean, for all kinds of reasons, legal and personnel and all the rest. No, I wouldn't be in favor of opening the books. I don't even think that's feasible. I would be completely in favor of total transparency. I mean, we all produce an independent audit, and I'm very proud of the fact that we've presented audits without any kind of concerns to Southern Baptists for the entire 28 years I've been president here. And we're unique among SBC institutions. We have a convention elected financial board made up of laypersons who are particularly assigned financial responsibility. And that goes back to long before the SBC elected the trustees. And so the most important control Southern Baptists have is electing trustees and in making the trustees, requiring the institutions to report, including an independent audited report of the institution's finances.
Okay, so go ahead, Bobby.
No.
Were
You
you going to
can
say
follow up
something?
on that. I was going to change direction, but you had a follow up, so go ahead.
Okay, that's okay. I think go in your direction.
Okay. Well, we just wanted to talk about one of the huge things that you have been a part about, or part of as Southern Baptist, and that's the GCR, the Great Commission Resurgence. And you were on the task force that helped put that together. Quite a laborious task, no question,
Yes.
in doing that without any question, and so many variables involved. But that was approved by the convention back in 2010. So I want to ask you, you're an academic. You're the president of an institution that you give grades. So if you were grading the GCR, now here we are a decade past, it's a beginning of its implementation. What kind of grade would you give it?
It's a fair question, Bobby. I'm not sure how to answer it in the sense that, we don't have the counterfactuals. In other words, we don't have any indication of of how the SBC would have operated without it. The GCR came out of a deep concern on the part of many that some changes needed to be made. I was honored to serve not only on that task force, but on the committee for the restructuring of the Southern Baptist Convention that began in 1993 and produced the Covenant for a New Century. I don't mean this politically. I mean this by disposition. I'm a conservative. I don't like any kind of change for the sake of change. I also believe that Southern Baptist polity, deeply rooted in Scripture and in our history, is right, and that means you have Baptist bodies, general Baptist bodies, association, state conventions, and the National Convention, and we have entities that are assigned tasks, including 2 mission boards. Deciding who does what where is very difficult. But I'll answer any specific question you have. I'm not sure what that might be, so I'm not going to just guess it. But I'll say this: this is tough going for Southern Baptists. I don't think we can avoid saying that. The numbers were and patterns were problematic. Now, again, what's the background of this? The background is, long before America got itself into this position, you have Europe that was secularizing. So we have about 60 or 70 years of seeing what happened to denominations and churches in Europe, secularizing far faster than the United States. Then you come to the U.S., and I mean, we're catching up pretty fast. And it's going to take Southern Baptists basically learning how to evangelize, congregationalize, and disciple faithful believers. I think, by the way, too much attention to structure is an indication of unhealth. I mean, changing the structure doesn't always improve a situation. I mean, we hope
Right.
it will. And I will say on that task force, in good faith, I hoped it would. But I also did not want to bring a revolution in Southern Baptist life, but at the same time respond to the desire for many for more direct missionary action, etc.
Right. Well, now you kind of started down this path just a little bit. So and not a long list, but what do you see as maybe some of the strengths that came out of the GCR, and I don't know, maybe some of the weaknesses too? I understand, just it's hard to assess what it would have been like without it, which I think is a great point. But we can look at what has happened at this point. And so, as a Southern Baptist Church member, but you're also a key Southern Baptist church leader. What do you see as the pros and the cons, the strengths and weaknesses?
When it comes to international missions, not that much changed. So we're really talking about Southern Baptist work in North America. And that's always the most difficult question, and has been since, well, about 1845. So many of the state conventions predated the SBC. So when the SBC came along in 1845, and then even when the cooperative program was adopted in 1925, the state conventions had the responsibility for local, statewide leadership, strategy, and participation. And one of the awkward questions for the SBC has always been, and so this is an 1845 question. It's a 1925 question. What's the relationship between, say, the Home Mission Board, now the North American Mission Board, and the states? I'm not copping out of your question, Bobby. I don't know how to answer that question fully. I think it varies kind of state by state. I think the state conventions don't want NAM or any SBC entity saying, we're going to do this rather than that. And I think that one of the most controversial issues about the current SBC strategy has to do with the focus on cities and church planting. And I mean, Southern Baptists have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of emphasis, and you put it here rather than there. And so if I were running NAM, I'd have a far smarter response to make here, or maybe if I was a state convention executive director. I will say that I think that there were a couple of things, such as, for instance, and sometimes things are temporal. In other words, there's a pressing issue right here, right now, and that affects
Right.
what Southern Baptists do. And
Sure.
so the category of Great Commission giving, I've never been much of a fan of. I defend it because it's real, and I was on the committee that brought the recommendation that it be counted. But I believe first and foremost in the cooperative program, and I want to keep cooperative program giving strong. The SBC and our work can have great levels of Great Commission giving, but if the cooperative program is not strong, then so you can ask me anything. I don't think I can be offended by any question. You may test that theory, but I don't want to just drone on about what I think
Right.
the question may be.
Yeah, that's okay. We weren't trying to poke you to try to offend in any way. So, Jody, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you speaking out about GCR. As a member of the task force, you were in
Mm-hmm.
Arkansas with Ronnie Floyd,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe Johnny Hunt was there. You're talking to a luncheon of about 400 people, and Tammy Ledbetter
Boy,
and
I
I were
wish I had
covering
your
it.
memory.
Well, it's enhanced by the stories that I've written.
Okay.
But I do remember you mentioning General Motors. And so I had
Yeah.
to look back at what you said about that and try to
Yeah.
understand it. But you compared Southern Baptist to General Motors. And what you just said about 1945 rang a bell too, because you said if Southern Baptists like General take comfort in the bigness and in the statistics, then they're in for kind of a rude awakening because they need to look back at the whole of everything. And but if they don't act, is what you said, they needed to act before the embarrassment and failure of the SBC goes beyond what the shareholders of GM experienced.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, it's been like, what, 11 years or so since GCR, and that's not, a whole lot of time in comparison to all of the other time. But I remember, and I looked back at what the GM shareholders did experience, and it was
Yeah.
pretty
Catastrophic.
critical. And yeah, and part of it was because they weren't paying attention. And I thought again about some of these questions about transparency and how do we get there, and especially in regards to the state
Mm-hmm.
conventions, um, with church planners, with North American Mission Board, and with everybody kind of being, kind of at each other's, just wanting the best. And I thought, okay, so let's ask Al Mohler, Dr. Al Mohler, Dr. R. Albert Mohler Jr., and see what he has to say about how how would you, as a president of the SBC, basically a member of every board, correct?
A
Including,
member of the general boards, not of the individual institutions. So that would be the annuity
hmm,
board, Lifeway, and the two mission boards.
okay,
The
but
the
how would you?
president is a member ex officio of those four boards.
Interesting. Okay, so how would you then, coming into this as president of the SBC, have influence over, how would you suggest a course correction be necessary so that the stockholders, the shareholders, Southern Baptists who right now feel
Mm-hmm.
disenfranchised, how would you make a correction to that?
Joni, good question. May I give just a little background to why I use that metaphor of General Motors?
Yes, of
I'm a
course.
theologian, a historical theologian, systematic theologian, and apologist. I don't normally go first to American corporate life for an illustration, but it really
Mm-hmm.
fits, and I still feel it as a parable. So back when I was editor of the Christian Index, the state paper in Georgia, I got appointed by a big national foundation that was funding this giant study of denominations. And there were three Southern Baptists named to this study. It was Timothy George, who was then at Beeson, and Richard Land, who was at the Christian Life Commission, and I were the three named. And we were all put in different groups because they couldn't stand more than one Southern Baptist in any group. And by the way, I was the only member of the group who wasn't a member of the Black Panthers or the Students for a Democratic Society. Most of these were liberal Protestants, and let me tell you, that was a baptism by fire. I could tell you stories that would make your blood curdle. Richard and Timothy and I actually walked out of the last meeting just because it got too crazy. But look, they put a lot of money into the study of denominations, and so we were able to direct a lot of effort to the study of the Southern Baptist Convention. And this is something Baptists don't know. So about transparency. This is something that Southern Baptists don't know, and that is that the SBC used to have kind of an official commitment to be General Motors. Now, Dr. Gilstrap, being in Michigan, he can tell you that story. But in the 1950s, the Southern Baptist Convention actually hired Booz Allen and Hamilton, who were the management theorists who had designed, along with Alfred Sloan, the modern General Motors. And the idea was you had all these different brands. You had a silo for Chevrolet, Pontiac, Cadillac, Buick, et cetera, GMC. And they would compete with each other somewhat, but they became these engines for silos. And the SBC hired, I mean, it wasn't like a hostile takeover. The SBC Executive Committee hired Booz Allen and Hamilton to design it for the future. And it designed the Southern Baptist Convention as we know it, as I knew it as a boy and as a teenager. And look, there's still a legacy from that. There's still a legacy of that corporate management influence there. And a part of it was that there used to be something called the Key Church Committee, and it was made up of all the entity heads of the SBC, although the old Sunday School Board used to run it. And it created a paradigm of the normal Southern Baptist Church. And even during the time I've been president of Southern Seminary, I know that may seem like ancient history, but go back to the 1990s, that committee still existed. And so it met together, and I was as president of Southern Seminary, I was one of the people in it. I thought it was crazy. But they would say, the average church, and this is what our literature is going to be directed at, this is what the mission board is going to be directed at, this is what the pictures in the Southern Baptist periodicals are going to look like. It's to have, a brotherhood and a WMU, a graded Sunday school. It's going to use all this curriculum, all the rest. Okay, my point is this. That works if you have a command and control structure like General Motors, until it doesn't. The command and control system of General Motors failed because the chief executives were making products that the people were no longer buying, and they hid behind sales numbers for a long time until it was catastrophe. I'm afraid that I was always afraid. That's my entire adult life. I was in my 20s when I was named to that process. I've been afraid that that's what happened to the SBC, is that same lack of understanding reality would take place. But to get to your point, I think the biggest problem with the annual meeting of the Southern Baptist Convention is that it is set up to prevent Southern Baptists talking about what concerns them. So if I were elected president, I just put it this way, I've championed this. I will continue to champion it in whatever capacity the Lord allows. We need for Southern Baptists to talk about things. I think, you invited me to have this conversation. I'm here. I think Southern Baptists should talk. I have seen Southern Baptists get into a room and talk things through and do the right thing. The SBC annual meeting is set up right now so that messengers come with concerns, and basically there's no chance of them ever being considered. There are questions asked, and there is no particular accountability to answers. This has got to change. This is not healthy. It won't last. So I first of all, the president of the SBC has convening power, and I would use that to try to get as many people, the right people in the room, and say, look, these tensions between X and Y, what are the issues? Let's get them out in public. This is not, and in public, I mean amongst us. You don't do it before the world on Twitter unless you want to blow your own house up. But in a way that would please God and honor Southern Baptists, how do we get these things out? You mentioned Resolution 9. You mentioned many other things. Those problems did not emerge because Southern Baptists talked about things too much at the SBC, but because they discussed them too little.
Yeah, I think you're probably right now. Let me pause for a second and make
Thank
sure
you.
that we have said thank you to you for participating and being a part, talking to Southern Baptists that are in this group and the questions they've had. We greatly appreciate that. But let me just pick up on one thing. We've had a lot of discussion in the group about the ERLC, and actually one of the other presidential candidates made the comment that he felt like probably the time had come when we didn't really need an ERLC as Southern Baptists, that most of the information and the kinds of advocacy that's out there now would be enough that Southern Baptists can get the kind of information that before we weren't able to have. So, what would be your thoughts on the future of the ERLC?
Yeah, not offended by the question, but I'm going to respond by saying whomever is elected president of the Southern Baptist Convention will have to maintain many conversations like that in private, because in public the conversations just don't work. Um, so look, I'm a fellow entity head in the SBC. That's not a news bulletin. But even a president who's elected who's not in that capacity is elected president of the convention. He's got to lead, and that that there are huge questions. Obviously, it's a big tension point in the SBC. I would, and again, it's not because we've had too many healthy official conversations. It's because we haven't. And
Right.
I believe that that Southern Baptists only this whole thing only works if we have lots of conversation. And you know, I hope my entire life I've given evidence of that. I try never to turn down Southern Baptists who ask me to talk about anything and want to ask me any questions. I consider it a privilege.
Yeah, that's
But on
great.
on, the, on that specific question, let me just be
Yeah.
on the line to say
Mhm.
it would be improper for me to say too much and anything other than to support the Southern Baptist Convention now. And whoever's elected president will have to speak that way uh, and and use influence where possible to make something healthy happen.
Okay, thank you. Joni,
Um,
did she
that
freeze up?
was
Oh, no, there she is. There she
no,
is.
no. There I am. Did I freeze up?
Yeah.
No, I was listening intently, and
Yeah, that's okay.
I appreciate your candid answers. Um, if I just may ask, how do you see those conversations taking place? Give me a concrete example.
Well, let me not use names and places. Let me just speak in strategy. Um,
Okay.
I would ask as president to speak with those trustees in mass. I would
Mhm.
just say, look, here are concerns, um, and of every single SBC entity, you need to be far more forthcoming in answering the questions of Southern Baptists, and you need to go the extra mile. And a president can help to make that happen. And look, Southern Baptists ought to ask me any question, and I need to tire them out answering it comprehensively and not evasively. So I'm trying to do that now. I think the convening power of a president of the SBC is huge. I pray whoever's elected will use that convening power to bring Southern Baptists more into the conversation, because then I think healthy things will happen. The great lesson of the conservative resurgence is that grassroots Southern Baptists are a people of conviction, and their concerns need to be heard and respected. I hope I proved in my life I do that.
Let me ask just one more question, and I think then we have to go
Sure.
to questions of our online
Uh-huh.
audience. Um, in 2004, um, Russell Moore uh, wrote wrote a column about the BWA and their use of a creed, the Apostles' Creed.
Yeah, the
Yes, I
Baptist
found
World
that too.
Alliance. Right. Yeah.
Yes. And he urged the same for Southern Baptists. So, it's just given that background, would you describe the BF&M 2000 more? And I know you were on the committee and so forth. more as a guide or a rule? And a
I
confession
believe,
or a creed?
look, I mean, I'm on the record on this long before there was a BF&M 2000. I am a Baptist confessionalist. I believe that a confession of faith only matters if it's regulative, normative, if it's a rule, not if it's a suggestion. It was the liberals in the SBC who were always trying to make a hard distinction between a confession and a creed. And you still hear this coming up. Confession is voluntarily, adopted as a statement of faith, whereas a creed is binding. Well, the problem with that is that, number one, Baptists from the beginning would use both words. This seminary's founding documents includes a reference to the abstract of principles as a creed. And so when I invest every single faculty member in office upon election of the trustees, that office is entered into agreeing ex animo, that is, and this is the language of our own charter, ex animo, of spiritual agreement, to teach in accordance with and not contrary to all that is contained therein, without hesitation or mental reservation or private agreement with the one who invests him in office. Now, there are, I can tell you that that should be absolutely binding upon anyone who takes a paycheck from the SBC, anyone who teaches in an SBC entity, anyone who forms a church or goes as a missionary. But look, one of the points I made in an article I published just last week is this. You know, we say that the confession isn't binding on our churches. Well, but at the same time, the very first section defining membership in the Southern Baptist Convention in our own Constitution says that the congregation is to be in agreement with the Baptist faith and message, or a similar statement of the same convictions. And so, I will tell you this. I I believe that if a confession is not regulative, then it's nothing more than a statement of attitude, and that's how Southern Baptists or any other body get into trouble. Again, you can just look around me. I am surrounded by evidences of confessionalism. And by the way, the Baptist World Alliance, I tweeted about it today. Their day of prayer for women, a mailing came to the seminaries addressed to Mrs. R. Albert Mohler Jr., president of the Southern Baptist Theological. This is how you find out there's been a coup d'etat. Yeah.
That's funny. That is
I'm
funny.
sure.
Look,
I'm sure she was
let's take
thrilled.
a.
Let me ask a follow up on that.
Oh, yeah. Go
On
ahead.
that.
Go ahead.
Let me ask a follow up on that question. If if um, if that is the case, who is going to regulate such matters? And let me give you an example.
Yeah.
A church that was founded right there in Louisville in 2012, Sovereign Grace Church, C.J. Mahaney. It is listed as an SBC church still.
Yeah.
Online. Has a variety of beliefs posted that are also consistent with other Sovereign Grace churches.
Mm-hmm.
Listed as an SBC church. It's not the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. It goes way beyond that. At least a quick analysis shows me that. So who's to regulate that?
So look, we have only a couple of backstops here, and I'm hoping this is working. My computer keeps trying to say it's trying to shut down, but I'm not hitting anything here, so I just keep saying no. I don't want to shut it down. I mean, it keeps coming up. I assume I can just kind of continue on.
Yeah, you freeze just a little bit for a second, then you come back. So I think you're okay right now.
All right. Yeah, it's saying I've run out of application memory. I don't know. It may have run out of personal memory. But to Joni's point, look, I don't think this is going to work. I just don't. I will make the Southern Baptist Convention remains really clear about our doctrine and remains true to our convictions, then increasingly we're going to have to be serious about defining our identity by the Baptist faith and message as adopted by the messengers of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'll be in trouble, but this is the fact. I think that one of the most dangerous things we have in the SBC is the online directory of SBC churches, um, because I don't think there's any real accountability there as to whether they believe what Southern Baptists believe, teach what Southern Baptists teach, and I don't know how to answer the question, but I'll tell you that as you know, when the SBC was formed in 1845, there are basically only two issues in terms of a church. It's contributing to the convention and being a congregation in friendly cooperation with, and then it says contributing to the causes of the SBC. Well, there are a large number of churches. I won't say large, a significant number of churches who I don't think are really in any serious theological way Southern Baptists, who are nonetheless listed as Southern Baptist churches because they qualify on those standards. I think you take the LGBTQ issues and some other things. That's not going to happen.
Well, we want to take just a break and go over to our questions from online and see. We have a couple of questions there. Let me remind you, we are going to talk about Resolution 9 and critical race theory, which Dr. Mohler has spoken out on quite a bit in the past, but we'll do that toward the end of our interview. So right now, Randy, if you can jump online and give us a couple of these questions that we've had submitted.
Okay, well, Dr. Mohler, we've had a few questions. Some of them are somewhat redundant, so I'm not going to post any of those. So let me just start here. This is kind of broad, but I'll just kind of see where it leads you. So let me get this question up here. And so this one doesn't give us a name, but it says there have been serious allegations about major corruption in the SBC. Is there corruption in the SBC? And should SBC entities be required? And of course, you've answered that last part of that. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, to be more transparent, yes, I think we should be ready to answer any question. And not only that, with the trustees responsible. And so for instance, I have very little spending authority at Southern Seminary, and that's the way I like it. The trustees have to approve and that's the financial board. They have to approve just about everything. You may know we just suffered a significant fire here over the weekend, and the Lord preserved life. That's what's most important.
No.
But the reality is that, I mean, the first people I'm getting a hold of this after we have lives secured and students taken care of is the financial board. And I guarantee you that that the trustees who are elected by the SBC, who serve in that capacity, will answer any question. But I want to warn. So none of us can survive reckless charges of corruption. We would need specificity of concerns and then transparency in response. And that's why trustees elect. The Southern Baptists elect trustees, and our system's only as good as the trustees who operate in that system. And the Lord's made it possible. I mean, the conservative resurgence was only possible because there are people who gave generously of their time and effort and attention to make certain that the institutions are faithful. We've got to have trustees of the same quality and conviction, but also we got to have trustees of ability and commitment to time. And Southern Baptists have the right to ask any question and have it rightly answered.
Yeah, Dr. Mohler, let me follow up real quick on that. There has been much discussion, even in our group, about the role of trustees right now all across, and it's probably motivated some by folks that are concerned about possible corruption, that kind of thing. But what do you see as the role? I mean, it's a significant role, but what do you see, and are there ways that we can improve our trustee system from your perspective?
Like I say, part of the problem is, look, Southern Baptists somehow made a decision starting, 20 years ago or so that we need to cut meetings short. And that means you have less discussion, you have less knowledge. And when I was elected president of Southern Seminary, we had one annual trustee meeting. Well, one of the first things I did was ask the trustees to meet twice, and in April and then also in October, and I want as much involvement as I can possibly get from trustees, but that means trustees have to give the time. And so, Bobby, I'll say this: the trustee system is the only system we have. It's like the American Constitution. It doesn't promise a well-functioning, accountable government. But it's the best classical system I know to make that more than less likely. So Southern Baptists need to serve on boards when elected. They need to serve faithfully, be informed, and be ready to discuss not only in trustee meetings, but through right processes, and that means primarily trustee officers reporting to the SBC.
All right, Dr.
Me.
Mohler.
But before any financial report is given from Southern Seminary to the Southern Baptist Convention, our trustees have to vote on it. They vote on whatever report goes to the SBC. That's really important. They vote on the audit, they vote on the financial report, they approve the budget, and that's what gets forwarded.
Okay, Randy?
Let me ask.
Oh, a follow-up to that,
Yeah,
Joni?
let me ask a little follow-up to that. Dr. Mohler, are you familiar with, or do you have at Southern trustee forums?
You mean open
Forums,
discussion?
right, before the actual full board meetings?
Yes, I believe we pioneered that in 1993. It happens at every single meeting,
So
as
basically,
long as trustees want it to last.
they're like an executive session, but
Yes,
without the business being discussed or
right. So that
passed.
they can raise a question about anything. They can raise any topic of conversation. They can say, I think we need to think about this, talk about that. They have the right to ask me anything.
Okay.
And
Okay,
look,
good.
that's another
That's
part.
good
That's another
information.
part of our. There's another part of our polity you have to keep in mind. You can just take the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention. Let's just think about that for a moment. The executive committee meets 3 times a year constitutionally. It meets in September, and they've cut their meeting back quite a bit. It used to last a lot longer. It doesn't, and everybody used to come to it. All the state execs came to it. The state paper editors came to it. But the most important thing was that the committee members came and they stayed. They had opportunities for fellowship as well as for business. And then there's the pre-convention meeting at the SBC. Now, there are subcommittees and other special committees, et cetera. At least they used to call them that. But the fact is that the executive committee now of the Southern Baptist Convention, if you are a member of the executive committee, you may be involved net in less than, say, 20 hours of meetings a year. Now, I'm not saying that by travel time and meal time and all the rest, but I mean there's just not that much time given. Uh, I don't I think trustees ought to put more time into this, but I realize the difficulty. But just also understand that from the beginning, this means that the most important thing trustees do, 2 functions. One of them is annual, and that's reporting to the SBC, audit, budget, financial reports, etc. The most important thing they do is elect a chief executive, because the executive officer has more to do with the identity and with the function of all SPC entities. And if that president's doing his job, it's all encompassing. But I tell new trustees when they're elected, the most important thing the board does is elect a president and then make certain he's doing the job that is assigned to him, and that the institution is doing its job assigned from the SBC. So just don't underestimate. That's how important every one of these searches is. That's how important every one of these executive elections is.
Yeah, very good. Okay, Randy, another question?
All right, Dr. Mohler, let's see here. Let me get the question up here. Derek Dickens asks, is the Southern Baptist Convention trying to do too much and thus risking losing its focus? How would you re-engage our vision, mission, and values across the denomination?
I think Derek raises a very good point. We need to do fewer things better rather than more things poorly. And look, there's a sense in which some of this is already taking place. I mean, you just take Lifeway, for example. They used to have a church architecture department. So far as I know, they don't have that anymore. I think there are entire areas where we don't have the kind of program we used to have. But I'll tell you, it's going to be extremely difficult to decide what you want not to do. I mean, because there's a reason why, in terms of all the main programs, there's a reason why Southern Baptists do it. Uh, you lose control of theological education, and you'll have a very different denomination. I mean, just remember this: the conservative resurgence SBC only worked because the seminaries were still under the control of the SBC. You give that up, well, you give away the store. There are almost, I won't say there are none, but there are very few examples of any theological institution that stays straight unless the churches have a right to say, we're going to pull the plug. When it comes to the other entities of the SBC, the reality is that Southern Baptists are deeply involved in church planning and evangelism and sending missionaries and training pastors. And in terms of the budget of the SBC, that's by far most of what happens. Now, if you're talking about inside NAM or inside the IMB or inside Southern Seminary, I'll just use my own institution, then I think we always have to be ready. But I mean, one of the things I did when I came here as president was to shut down programs. We shut down the School of Social Work, which was shut down largely for theological reasons, but also because I didn't think it was central to what we were doing in training pastors. And we shut down a school of church music and worship. We still do. We have more students training for music and worship now, but without the infrastructure of a school. And by focusing primarily on pastors, the Lord's blessed, we have more, MDiv students than in the history of not only the Southern Baptist Convention, but the Christian Church. So I do believe in doing more with less. We are educating far more students with 2 graduate schools than we did with 5.
All
And I
right.
don't have 5 deans. I have 2 really outstanding deans.
All right, Dr. Mohler, thank you for that answer. And I'm going to follow up with another question. This one just comes from a Facebook user. It doesn't give us a name, but it's question on complementarianism. I think you know a little bit about this probably. How do you see the most recent ordinations as it relates to the accountability issues in our convention, which you referred?
I want to be real clear. I don't want to be a part of any Southern Baptist convention that's not unapologetically complementarian. I think, look, this was one of the defining issues of Southern Baptists returning to theological accountability and biblical fidelity in the last generation. And look, all the old arguments are back. This is Friday's edition of the local newspaper here. It's like every 20 years we got to have the same battle all over again. Does God also call women as pastors? Well, Mohler has the wrong answer. The answer is no, and not because Albert Mohler's preference, but because of the Word of God. Look, I wrote a long piece, about 1,400 words on this. It's just at my website right now, and you'll either like it or hate it. But it defends Southern Baptist complementarianism, and so. I'm trying to think of how best to stop answering this question other than to say this is a battle we're either going to deal with or not. Oh, I remember. You said the word ordination. Ordination, and I know I surprised people when I said Southern Baptists have no strong theology of ordination. We don't, period. But where the word is used, it generally implies the pastoral office, and that's the problem.
Well, Dr. Mohler, thank you for that. I will say I've appreciated some of your comments that I've listened to about the not distinguishing between office and function. Been very helpful for me thinking through some of these issues. But I'm going to ask you a question, just a personal, so I'm not going to type it into the comments. But something that's I've been wondering as it relates to the ordination that happened at Saddleback and the things that have kind of come out of that. When you look at our bylaws, in order to be in friendly cooperation. It doesn't. It merely says that you have to closely align. So I mean, I could believe everything about the Baptist Faith message except that one line, and I would rightly think I closely align. So, do you think there needs to be some pre-steps to moving forward to how we're looking at those things? Because I don't think we could rightly just oust them at this point.
No, and I'm not calling for that. I'm calling for Southern Baptists to make our convictions clear. And I think over time, we're going to have to be more specific about these things. Because look, I was on that committee in 2000, and well, the Lord allowed me a major opportunity for contribution in that process. And I can tell you that in the year 2000, we tried to sew up several issues that have changed in nomenclature. So, for instance, we didn't even have the term transgender in 1999, 2000 that was accessible in any real way. We had not confronted the transgender ideology. Now, I think all we need is in the Baptist Faith and Message. But let me point to an issue. The Baptist Faith and Message, in its statement on the doctrine of man, says that gender is a part of the goodness of God's creation, God making human beings male and female. Well, there are some people now who will tie themselves into a knot like a pretzel and say, well, I basically affirm that, but my definition of gender or sex, and the word there is gender, so that it doesn't look like we're saying that sexual activity was the issue. It's the word sex has too many meanings in our society. But the point is that I don't call for rewriting the Baptist Faith and Message. You know, that's only been done about once every 35 years, and a denomination is very reckless if it does it much more often. We don't want to get to the situation which the Baptist Faith and Message can mean year by year whatever a majority of messengers decide it means. That's not healthy. But we do have the opportunity to define this, and in particular for the work of our agency. Southern Baptists have every right to say to the agencies of the SBC, here's our definition of X or Y. We expect you to deal with it. And look, a resolution is not the cleanest way to do that, because it expresses the convictions of those who are in the room at the time. But there are other ways that the SBC can help to make that very, very clear. And the best example of that is the Baptist Faith and Message. When the Southern Baptist Convention adopted the Revised Baptist Faith and Message in the year 2000, it did not include an automatic mechanism to require all the entities of the SBC to adopt it. That's not in there. Encouragement was in there. But Adrian Rogers was chairman of the committee, and let's just say his encouragement meant that within a fairly short amount of time, all the entities of the SBC had adopted the Baptist Faith and Message. Their influence is very important here.
Absolutely. Dr. Mohler, there are a number of things that, and we're not going to be able to hit them all, but a number of things you would have to face as the president if you were elected. One of those has brought a lot of concern in our group, and there's actually been a lot of conversation back and forth, and that is after losing in the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court, the North American Mission Board has taken to the Supreme Court a petition in a case against Dr. Will McRaney. I'm not looking for your opinion necessarily on that, but there are a lot of concerns about what may happen if the North American Mission Board, first, it has to be accepted, obviously, but if the court accepts it and it's played out in court, if the North American Mission Board were to win, there's concern that that could expose all of Southern Baptist churches, associations, state conventions, the national level, including the executive committee, to ascending, descending liability. What do you think about that? And you would have to be kind of in the middle of some of those discussions if it moves forward, since the Supreme Court is supposed to make a decision about accepting or not accepting that case in June, as I understand it.
Yeah, by the way, we should all be very thankful the Supreme Court granted a writ of certiorari on the Mississippi abortion case today. That's big news and very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
Very big news.
But look, regardless of who you talk to, who may be nominated as president of the SBC, it will be a part of his responsibility to know not to answer your question in any public forum, lest it become actionable against the Southern Baptist Convention. I will simply say, regardless of who's elected, it'll be the responsibility of that president to defend the integrity and the rights of the Southern Baptist Convention, including to avoid ascending or descending liability. It will be incumbent upon that president to stress historic Baptist polity and to define what that means. But whoever's elected president of the SBC will have to know that it is wrong to answer that question, given the fact that any statement we make could be used at the expense of the SBC in court. The first, the line of the Hippocratic Oath, "First do no harm," has to be the commitment of anyone who would serve in this role. And I want to say again, an awful lot of the most important leadership in the SBC has to do with stuff that doesn't get discussed in public.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Johnny, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I mean, so given what
Ask
you
me a question
said,
about theology or polity or whatever, and I'll answer your question. Don't ask me
okay,
about a lawsuit
well,
about,
okay, okay. So let's see if we can ask you a general question about polity. Then would you say that our convention or any of our entities could be described, or the SBC can be described as an umbrella organization that has a hierarchical, I can't say that word, forgive me, that's a terrible word for an English teacher not to be able to say, system of polity?
I did not know you were going to ask me this question, but remember my opening comment, I said I'm committed to historic Baptist polity, which means general Baptist bodies that are independent of one another. Associations, state conventions, and the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, we sometimes mess that up, especially between the SBC and state conventions, but actually even more between state conventions and associations, where we have people being paid to run associations or to lead associations, things like that. But at least in theory, our polity says that general Baptist bodies are completely independent of one another. And churches are, and this is often confused. You take the complementarian issue. Churches are autonomous. They have the right to do whatever they want to do. The SBC doesn't order a church to do anything, but the SBC has every right to define its own membership, and so does every other general Baptist body. An association has the right and responsibility to decide what churches are in right faith and practice as a member of this association. Same thing for state conventions, same things for the SBC. We work together. But there is no magisterium. We do not elect a pope. We don't even let the president serve more than 2 terms, and it's a part-time job.
Yeah, very good. We want to wrap up in about 7 or 8 minutes. So, Randy, do we have any more other questions coming in? If not, we've got a couple of more things we were going to ask to wrap it up.
I'll try to be quick.
Oh, that wasn't a hint at you. I wasn't pointing at you, Dr. Mohler.
I don't
Okay,
really.
Randy?
I mean, other than I know you're going to hit on something that's been questioned, but there haven't been really any broad-reaching questions that would reach outside of anything that you've already asked to some extent.
Okay, very good. Well, prior to the GCR, Dr. Mohler, I'll just pause. Whoops, he's frozen again. So there he is. He's back loose. Prior to the GCR, I was not aware at any institution that we had or any entity where we were actually using non-disclosure agreements. And that's one of those things that's really surfaced in conversation in our group as well. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Southern does use non-disclosure agreements in some situations. Can you help us understand a little bit about the criteria? I know it's not like a technical company with proprietary information or something of that sort, but what kind of criteria is used for something like that? And do you think that's something that is appropriate, for Christian organizations to be using? And I'll give you a little bit of the background. Usually that question has kind of surfaced when the question of transparency was being discussed. Like, well, what are we hiding
Right.
at that point? And so and that's just kind of an obvious suspicion. But I wanted to throw it out to you and let you respond to that.
Yeah, in theory, we can think of all kinds of things that we might rather not use, but depending upon your state jurisdiction, it may be very difficult not to use something like a non-disclosure. And that came look, when I was elected president of Southern Seminary, it had been under moderate control. They had a moderate law firm that was handling their business, and one of the trustees, who was most crucial in the conservative turn of this institution, was U.S. Federal District Judge, Chief Judge, who was here, Ron Meredith. He had been U.S. Attorney. Ronald Reagan appointed him to both of those posts. He got to me even as he was dying of cancer and told me we had to get a new law firm, and otherwise we wouldn't be able to do what we needed to. Uh, he made that possible. He actually chose our lawyer, and I have followed legal advice from that firm from that day onward. And a part of it is a hold harmless. You can't wrap up negotiations with someone. Remember, I had to basically get, I've got to watch my words here. I had to transition out an entire faculty who were contracted and most of them tenured. Every single one of those, but at the end of the day, required an agreement whereby we allowed them to retire or to resign and to remove themselves without further sanction. But that also meant that every single one of those is necessitated some kind of agreement here, and a hold harmless, and also a no harm to the other. Without that, we would not have been able to transition the faculty as we did. I can't imagine doing this job in that way. But here's the problem. NDAs are a grotesque way of hiding the truth if the governing board doesn't have access to them. And the governing board should have access to everything, or the representatives of the elected board, but they're their own officers or subcommittee, whatever they choose. But I've got nothing to hide from my board ever, because the board is behind every one of those. Otherwise, it wouldn't do it. And so Southern Baptists eventually have to trust the trustees that they elect. Otherwise, the whole system breaks down. But, for instance, I know I've got to be careful here, but I know of no situation in the SBC where I know of any NDA which, reasonable Southern Baptists wouldn't support if they knew the circumstances. But look, I have to deal with some pretty tough matters. Almost 30 years, I stand on my track record of dealing with some pretty tough matters. And I'm doing so as the sole employee. It's a little unique at Southern Seminary. I am not an employee of the seminary. The state of Kentucky thinks so, but according to the Constitution, I'm not. I'm the sole employee of the Board of Trustees. So they're who I answer to, and trust me, I don't surprise them.
Well, and that's an interesting structural identification, because I think probably most Southern Baptists don't realize that oftentimes in a role similar to yours, that you are accountable directly to that trustee board and not necessarily as such to everyone, to the whole institution as such, because that board is the one that's supposed to be governing at that point. Okay, Randy, I believe you had another question. Oh, go ahead.
No, it's just that you may have seen, you may know very well that, the faculty voted no confidence in me. It was the liberal faculty voted no confidence in me, 54-2, I believe. That's an overwhelming vote. The student body government hung me in effigy and turned their backs to me when I preached opening convocation, and then protested for weeks outside my office singing "We Shall Overcome," which they didn't overcome, that is. But in every case, I could simply say, I'm not working for you. Here's a little hint. I don't work for you. I work for the Board of Trustees of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And that's very clarifying. It's been the security of my leadership here from the very beginning. Now, thankfully, we have students now for whom that's not an issue. We have faculty now for whom that's not an issue. But then again, I have to act on behalf of the SBC and our Board of Trustees in making some hard theological and moral decisions at times. I've got to take them all to the grave.
That's an interesting clarification. Yeah,
I've got to answer for them.
Right, exactly. Okay, Randy has one more question, and then we want to move into talk about the Resolution 9 and CRT as well. So, Randy, your other question you had.
Dr. Mohler, Matt Gilmore says or asks, with 4 people running for president, it seems more like a political campaign than we've had in the past. Unlike Dallas, when Dr. Greer stepped down as to not be divisive, is the SBC unrepairable? How do we get unity back and the Great Commission as our focus once again?
Well, let me tell you, the good news is that the Great Commission is not dependent upon whomever is elected president of the Southern Baptist Convention. It's up to our churches, and I have a lot more confidence in our churches. But it's not irrelevant to the work of the SBC. I agreed to be nominated in 2019 with a view to the 2020 convention. And I affirmed earlier this year when I was asked that I would continue to be willing to be nominated. I've never, to my knowledge, failed to try to help Southern Baptists in any way I can. And if this will help Southern Baptists, I want to do it. I don't have to be president of the SBC. I'm not comfortable with the election set up as it is now. This is a very uncomfortable situation for me. You know, I will say, like, Southern Baptists need to figure out what will serve them best and who will serve them best. And then all Southern Baptists need to get behind whatever Southern Baptists say, and do 2 things: both support the president as elected by the messengers and contend for the issues that we think are really important. And so electing a president is not the end of a discussion. So I want to answer your question, but you know, you ask a very good question. I didn't get in this to run against anyone, and when I said I'd be nominated both times, there was at that time no one else who had indicated the same. But I'm trying to be faithful in the midst of this. I know others are as well. I honor that.
Right. All right. Very good. Thank you, Dr. Mohler. Let me ask just kind of one more thing right before we talk about the CRT and the Resolution 9 real quickly. One of the things in my ministry, 40 plus years now, that it's always rewarding to me to run into somebody or to talk to somebody or to engage with somebody and they say, hey, you made a difference. You know, you made a difference in my life. Your ministry impacted me. I'm now able to do so and so or whatever, and it came as a result of that. You've had a tremendous impact on lots of people, not only students who have come to the school, but other faculty that have moved. And one of the graphics, we've got just a little map. I think you can see it if Randy can get it up on the screen. But we've got a little map that just kind of shows some of the other key people that you have had influence through to impact the leadership in the Southern Baptist Convention. Randy, do we have the graphic there you can put up? Yeah, there we go. And so it just, it's numbered by the year, but it shows you as number 1, obviously, when you went to Southern. But then it just identifies each of the others. You know, number 2 is Dr. Aiken, who worked with you as the academic dean. Number 3, we see number 3 moving over there as the Lifeway president, which was Dr. Tom Rayner. He was your missions and evangelism. And then Kevin Ezell went to the North American Mission Board as senior pastor. Number 5, let me just run them off real fast here. But Jason Allen went to Midwestern, one of the places where I graduated, but he was your vice president of institutional advancement. Number 6 was Dr. Russell Moore, who is at the ERLC, and he was your provost and dean there at the seminary. Number 7 was Dr. David Platt, who went to the International Mission Board. He was on the TGC Council with you. And number 8 was Paul Chitwood, Dr. Paul Chitwood, who's a friend also of mine, and he went to the International Mission Board and currently serves there, but he was the state convention president there in the convention. Not to say that you were influencing the whole convention.
Don't leave out the fact, if you're looking at a conspiracy theory, don't forget the fact that he was also a member of the faculty at Southern Seminary.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I wasn't necessarily looking at a conspiracy theory, but I was just wanting to raise awareness that you really have had a lot of influence. Just share with us briefly how you feel about having that kind of an impact. I mean, these are key people in key roles in our convention now. All across our convention. How does that make you feel, and what do you feel is a kind of the impact of that as far as part of your legacy?
Well, I'm not being evasive when I tell you the most important legacy will be pastors and churches. So I'm going to get to your question, but
Okay, no, that's good.
I didn't come here to primarily produce entity executives,
Mhm.
but pastors. We've been pretty monomaniacal about that. But on the other leaders in the SBC, I'll tell you, the Lord's allowed some very remarkable people to come through Southern Seminary and given me the opportunity. I've always had a prejudice towards appointing young men to big roles, and then seeing what they would do with it. I was elected editor of the Christian Index when I was 29. I was elected president of Southern Seminary when I was 33. Um, I have great experience for age. Now in my seventh decade of life, I will tell you, age has a lot going for it. It also has a lot not going for it. As a matter of fact, we're talking with Joni. Being grandparents is the best thing it's got going for it. But look,
Absolutely.
you don't want an entity head, going person by person through the SBC. So let me go ahead and talk about one thing. Let me answer your question. Then I want to raise two
Sure.
questions that I see come up often, and
Good.
one of them is that you know human beings are in motion one way or another, just because of context and time. And what I have had the opportunity for. Every one of those men did a wonderful job for Southern Seminary and for me while they worked for me. Every single one of them. And by the way, not all of them worked for me. Kevin Ezell was my pastor at Highview Baptist Church. And David Platt, I knew as a friend, and Noah's a friend, not so much in SBC circles. That's part of the story. But when someone's elected president, it's like when I don't want this to sound condescending or patronizing. It's not like we have children. It's not that, but it is true that if you're the father of a family and you have sons and who grow up and go out, you really find out who they are when they become fathers and husbands. And so when someone becomes a major leader on his own terms, well, then they're defining themselves. This is I mean, while they work for you, they're largely defined by you. And so, um, you don't want me making an evaluation of fellow agency heads in the SBC. That would be wrong, even if I frankly didn't know their middle names. It would still be wrong. And uh, and so, look, this is something that comes up again and again. And so I see this. I see it in the Twitter feed. I can't look at it very often, but I see it. Number one, the supposed 11th commandment, you shall not speak ill against a fellow leader in the SPC. Let me just tell you, that just about is the 11th commandment. So again, if you want a conspiracy theory, let me tell you, it's true as it can be, and the SPC won't work without it. That does not mean there's a lack of honor, candor, and accountability amongst us. It is to say that the SBC can't work if we're tweeting about each other, anything other than support. If we're talking publicly about each other, that doesn't work. We work for boards of trustees. We don't work for each other. And can you imagine the chaos that would ensue if you allowed staff members in your church, or elders in your church, or deacons in your church to publicly criticize one another? Wouldn't work. That doesn't mean you don't have disagreements. It doesn't mean that you don't have influence. It does mean you don't do that in public and have a denomination. You don't have a church left. So if someone thinks the 11th commandment is wrong, um, I pretty much guarantee you operate by it in some sphere of your life, and probably at times in your marriage, as a matter of fact. The other thing is, and that I've seen often is, and look, I've been criticized for not speaking to Resolution 9. And I see this in kind of snarky tweets all the time. I was very much part of that conversation with concerns about Resolution 9. But here's something you need to note. When I was elected to this role, one of the things that I was told very clearly by other entity heads, and frankly, you may remember I'd had the opportunity to work as assistant to the president and the previous president. SBC entity heads are told that we are not to basically compete with messengers for floor time on the SBC. I have never, in 28 years as president of Southern Seminary, I have never taken a messenger's time to enter into public debate. I have a platform for saying what I need to say. Um, and as much as I would like to speak to just about everything, because I know what's right about everything in the SBC, the fact is that it isn't fair if messengers go to a microphone only to have an entity head say, well, yeah, so what? This is what I say. That I have not done. I have answered questions when the president, the presiding officer of the SBC, has asked me to respond. And then when I report to the SBC, I have never spoken. So I think that'd be a valid criticism. If I spoke to other things and didn't speak to this, then you could raise the issue. Although,
Right.
again, a part of our problem is, and by the way, I didn't seek to speak to it. I did speak to people involved in it. So again, you're not going to offend me by you didn't raise. So say, okay, there you have it. There is an 11th commandment, and it's it's not etched in stone, but it is. And look, look when in the conservative resurgence, look in the conservative resurgence when conservative at the height of SBC conflict, when conservative presidents were elected to that office, you'll notice they did not speak publicly on these
Right.
issues. They used their influence stewarded privately. Um,
Right. Well, no,
just remember
you've
that.
gone ahead and raised the issue, but we've been saying we're going to talk about it anyway. The Resolution 9 really did become quite a powder keg, and has again here in the last year been a real powder keg among conversation. And I agree with you about Twitter. It's rather dangerous to your mental health, I think, to get on there for too long sometimes, for sure. But when you're looking at critical race theory, there does, or at least the perception of a lot of people, is there has been inconsistency, not just for you as a president who has spoken, intellectually about it, but about other decisions that have taken place with other presidents. And again, I understand invoking the 11th commandment at that point, but when you look at that, what do you think needs to happen in this annual meeting? Because that's a lot of the discussion now. What are we going to do in this meeting about Resolution 9? So clarify what you think can, should, or might happen.
Yeah. Anytime Andy sees any concern about inconsistency with me, you'll do a favor to me by raising what you think may be inconsistent. I'll simply say I articulate everything I feel called upon to speak upon to the tune of millions of words a year. And I think you can line them up over 30 plus years and find that they are incredibly consistent. If you think I'm wrong, I'm consistently wrong, especially on matters of conviction. But look, I encountered critical theory. Forget the racial for a minute, critical race theory, just critical theory. I encountered that
Right.
first as a college student in a secular context. And my first thought was this will work in the sense of a basically Marxist revolution brought about through cultural means rather than through economic revolution. But it's hard for me to understand how they're going to jump from this stupid, theory, which is, by the way, antithetical to Christianity. So the statement the seminary presidents adopted did not say critical race theory. It said all forms of critical theory, and are incompatible with Christianity. I mean, it starts in a materialistic worldview. It starts in a whole hermeneutic of suspicion. It starts not in an understanding of a biblical Augustinian definition of sin, like you see in the Baptist Faith and Message. It starts from the fact that that all of history is basically the story of oppression, and that liberation comes only by undoing all the structures and hierarchies that are produced by that history. Well, just remember, Christianity is a part of that. And so on the briefing a couple weeks ago, I talked about the fact that in Australia, it's not just where they talk about white Christian nationalism. And look, there can be such a thing, and it would be a heresy. But by heresy, I mean that technically, if you're worshiping a nation, that's idolatry. But they're using that. The left uses that as a way to dismiss all conservative Christian influence in the society. And there is a real problem and a real sin of race, and it leaves a legacy. And we need to be the people based in honesty of Scripture and the redemptive message of the gospel who know how to take sin seriously. But when critical race theory emerged, it basically emerges from an assumption that you got to tear this down because that's as hopelessly infected with hierarchicalism and oppression. But then you have to tear that down and that down and that down. And of course, with intersectionality, there is no logical reason why what applies in this case to one group doesn't get applied to the LGBTQ agenda and all the rest. And you just look in the larger culture, you don't have to ask any question about where that train leads with every successive car,
Right.
added to it.
Right.
There are African American brothers and sisters, Black brothers and sisters in our denomination who believe that denying critical race theory denies that racism is a sin with pernicious effects, and fails to validate them and honor them. I want to validate them. I want to honor them. But I think critical race theory will actually tear apart the Southern Baptist Convention. I think it will be very injurious to those who try to advance its arguments on behalf of some kind of racial equity, because I think there'll be someone else to come along with another claim, and there'll be someone behind that and someone behind that. We have to rebuild trust, and that's going to be really difficult. But I don't believe that Resolution 9 helped us.
Okay, what do you think will happen this
I
year?
said that. Well, I don't know what will happen because, I mean, for crying out loud, look,
Right.
I mean, we don't even know how many thousands of people will be in the room. And
Right.
look, nothing is easy in deciding how to deal with it. Nothing's easy in parliamentary procedure. Nothing's easy. I mean, you can't actually repeal a resolution because a resolution is dated. So the convention
Right.
that adopted it doesn't exist. One of the rules about the SBC is that no SBC can bind a future meeting. So you could adopt another resolution. You could adopt some kind of motion. Look, I don't know, because I don't know what's going to make it to the floor.
Right.
And I don't know how bad, I'm just praying it doesn't become an absolute. Look, I think if Southern Baptists were able to stay in the room for a long time and deal with this responsibly, I'd feel more confident. But I mean, look how rushed the discussion was on Resolution 9 in 2019.
Right.
Look how messengers are presented with it. You must vote on this now. You either trust the committee or you don't. Well, that's not healthy. I don't believe the SBC can survive critical race theory. I won't allow it to be taught at Southern Seminary. It's incompatible with the Baptist faith and message. The denial of the sin of racism in any biblical sense is also a horrible thing the SBC will not survive. But we can't define racism by critical race theory. You have to define it by biblical standards.
Right. And that is very, very critical. Joni, did you have a follow-up to that?
I do. Is there a corollary between using the same idea? Can individuals be sensitive to the problems, the concern about abuse of women, sexual abuse, harassment, abuse of children, even, without going to the extreme of, say, like the issue of, women's pastors, the issue of equality? I mean, is there a corollary to be drawn there that because there is a lot of concern, and there were questions related to, how would Dr. Mohler as president handle that? Is there a problem in the SBC? Should there be more
what?
done?
Jody, handle what?
Handle situations of abuse of women by pastors, reporting abuse.
Like the sexual abuse accusations we've seen,
Sexual
that
abuse
kind of
scandals.
thing.
Yeah. Well, I would say again, I'd handle it the same way I'd handle it as president of Southern Seminary. We have a huge problem for the SBC, which frankly we just really hadn't taken with adequate seriousness. And I'll say the big problem for the SBC, and so I don't mean for all our churches, that's a different issue, but for the SBC, our big issue is that given our polity, we have a situation now in which someone can be actually even convicted, not just credibly accused, but convicted of some kind of horrible sexual crime, and show up in another place and be called as pastor of a Southern Baptist church, or a church cooperating with the Southern Baptist Convention and qualified to send messengers. So in February, the SBC Executive Committee rightly and necessarily took action against a church, two churches, as a matter of fact, on this ground, and removed them from membership. Um, I, I, I think, look, we have to understand that at least a part of this is we have to ask the question, where are people most safe? And so people are, I mean, without naming names, there are people who are saying complementarianism is the problem here. Well, I got to turn around and say, no, according to the biblical worldview, the greatest safety for women, girls, children, all of us is in God's plan as revealed in creation and specified in Scripture. And that means ordering things according to the Scripture. So there is safety in and only in a church obedient to Scripture, and that means also in calling pastors. That means also in establishing leaders. And so, I think we just have to have a very clear conviction that you can't solve any problem moving away from Scripture. And so, to those who say you may have noted, I've been extremely clear about complementarianism. Can complementarianism be used as a cover for abuse? Yes. So can being a member of the Elks Club, I guess. No, don't the Elks come sue me, however many Elks there are left. But I mean, in other words, a sinful human being will, and I'll just say this: sinful men, predatory men, will use whatever opportunity they have to do sinful things. There's a really good biblical theological principle that makes that clear. We must not be the people who tolerate it. We're also the people who know that having a pastor is a biblical mandate. It's not the problem. It's calling the right biblically qualified man as pastor. That's the answer, and you just take that all the way down the line.
Dr. Mohler,
I have to, yeah.
No, I was just going to say we're wrapping up, and so we just wanted to say a special thank you to you for your patience and endurance. We didn't ask all 60 questions, but we sure wouldn't have had time for that tonight. So, would you like to close? Just make any kind of comment to our not only our 1,300 members in our group, but anyone else who might watch the interview tonight. What would you like to say in parting?
I'd like to say that I consider it an honor to be a part of this conversation. I think I hope I've demonstrated throughout my life. I love Southern Baptists. I love being with Southern Baptists. I love answering Southern Baptist questions and asking other Southern Baptist questions. I like being a part of this. The relationships mean a lot to me. Joni, thinking about being together at IU now nearly 30 years ago, that's important to me. I want to end with as many Southern Baptists on the same team as possible. But I only want to be a part of a Southern Baptist convention that's faithful to Christ and faithful to Scripture. And I think in these very difficult times of cultural headwinds and increasing overt hostility and seductions everywhere, it's going to take every ounce of conviction. And so in whatever role I play, and so I've been a part of this conversation at least for more than 30 years. I want to be an influence for health and fidelity. And look, the most important issue for Southern Baptists is not who's president of the convention elected in June. I don't have to be president of the SBC. If I can help Southern Baptists, I want to be. I was persuaded by many Southern Baptists that this would be helpful. But look, I really do trust Southern Baptists. That means I trust Southern Baptists to do the right thing over time. We don't always have the right decision made at any given moment, just like your church. But over time, there's no people on earth I would trust more than the churches and of the Southern Baptist Convention and their members. I trust Southern Baptists. So Jesus Christ said, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." He wasn't talking about the SBC. He was talking about his church. But all the SBC is a way for faithful Bible churches, Baptist churches, to cooperate together. So thank you for the privilege of the conversation, and God bless you all.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Mohler. We appreciate it from just on behalf of our SBC 21 Presidential Q&A group. And I'm Bobby Gilstrap with Johnny Hannigan tonight. We appreciate you joining us for this conversation, and we hope you'll stay tuned. We're hoping to have Ed Litton on the line for an interview before too long also. So thank you again for joining us.